Hello and welcome to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown. I'm the editor at Guns on Pegs and head of inspiration at Scribehound. My co-host's name is Chris Horn, founder and CEO of both Guns on Pegs and Scribehound. Afternoon, Chris.
Afternoon, George. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Very good. It's been a busy couple of weeks.
It has. We've had that lovely moment where, sorry I've not seen you, I've been out shooting a lot.
Well, so most notably, we were shooting together.
We were. And we had our podcast shoot day, which got a fair bit of airing after about half an hour of certain pods in the past. And it filled up with all the members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters. It was awesome fun, wasn't it?
It was such a great day. I don't want to talk too much about it now because I think what we'll do is try and do an episode with Ben, who very kindly hosted us, and Jake, without whom it wouldn't have happened. So I think we'll try and do an episode with them and we'll do a proper kind of post-match analysis on it. So we'll just tease.
That's very
that,
good of you.
I think we'll tease it.
Yeah, I thought you were going to use the opportunity to tell everyone about your high bird in the first drive and just sort of wang on about that.
I thought I'd let Jake do that for me.
Fine. Cool. Okay.
So that was very nice. But yeah, you've been on a couple of days. I've had a day at home since then as well. Can I tell you about something that happened when we were shooting at the weekend?
Go.
I've never heard of this before, but maybe you have. We've got a drive that currently isn't working terribly well because of the green manure crop that's in the field. And we were doing it slightly differently with the beaters coming through this green manure crop. And as the beaters were going through, there was a roe deer bedded down in the Phacelia, and it got up about 2 yards in front of a young lad about 10 years old and absolutely flattened him, mowed him straight down, big cut on the back of the head, off to hospital. Have you ever heard of something like that happening?
I mean, obviously seen a lot go through, but I've always wondered how they haven't hit anyone until now. That is it. Is he all right?
Yeah. I mean, a bit shaken up, I think, as you would be. But it's just, I mean, we've got roe deer everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere on the farm. I think we probably saw 20 on the day. So yeah, I like you. I've always wondered how it is that it's not happened more. But it's just because this one was properly bedded down in the long stuff and sat tight, and then eventually thought help, and just I don't know. Flatten this poor kid.
As long as it hasn't put him off his another 10 years of beating before he gets to the gun line.
Well, we were saying it's probably quite a good war story for when he gets back to school on Monday.
Right. Our guest today is Managing Director of J.M. Osborne Rural and Sporting. It's a sporting estate management company. He's a qualified charter surveyor and a land agent for over 40 years. Since 1988, he's been involved in setting up and running of several leisure and sporting businesses, including the E.J. Churchill Group, which not a lot of people may have known. In 2008, he acquired the William Powell brand and has grown it enormously, along with the sports agency side of the business, to something very well known to many of us. He's a pretty big deal in the grouse world. We'll come on to that in a bit. He's turned around many estates into prolific grouse moors. So please pull over to the side of the road, hop out the car, run around it, cheering, and a big warm welcome to Mark Osborne.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Yes. Well, I'm not sure after that introduction there's much more I can say, so probably I ought to sign off now.
I forgot about the E.J. Churchill bit. I was before our time in this world. Guns on Pegs started in 2007. I mean, I was obviously around. I'm not talking about an age thing. I would say Guns on Pegs was in 2007. So that was about the same time that the William Powell bit then kicked off. It's all sort of a distant memory now.
That's right, yeah. Well, Churchill's, I was joint owner with Edward Dashwood and managing director for 18 years, from when we started as West Wickham Shooting Ground and then acquired the Churchill brand, I think probably about 5 years later. It was 18 very good years, very, very interesting, great to be involved in different aspects, the corporate hospitality, the shooting ground, the gun making, although I'm probably very pleased that I'm no longer involved in active gun making, and sporting agency and everything. Yeah, really good. Very good.
Great. Well, I think we're probably quite lucky to have got you, Mark. I'd imagine this time of year you're buzzing around the country a fair bit, are you not? Shooting and hosting clients and that kind of thing?
I probably do less shooting than everybody imagines. I spend a lot of time running around the country, sort of working. But I still work, shoot a bit, and rush around a lot. Probably rather like a duck. There's a lot of furious activity, but not necessarily much progress when I'm paddling along.
Well, where are you rushing off to next?
After this, I'm going to actually check a customer on guns who's come in to have a shooting, to have a gun fit, and then he's looking to buy a gun. So I'm just going to go and catch up with him, and then I'm off to the Cotswolds where we're staying tonight in a pub. And we are shooting tomorrow in the Cotswolds. And this is going to be a very special day because it's 50 years ago in September, 2 months ago, I went to Cirencester to the Royal Agricultural College, now the Royal Agricultural University, and as a completely sort of raw fresher, met a whole lot of people. And 50 years later, we're still friends, and we're having a shoot day in the Cotswolds together. So this is going to be a fantastic evening tonight, which is why I'm actually drinking coffee now, and hopefully in preparation for a great shoot day tomorrow. Although, given what the weather forecast is for tomorrow, it could be quite an interesting day.
It's going to be a bit breezy, isn't it?
I think it's going to be very breezy.
50 years of a team going strong. Have you shot together every year?
No, we haven't. We started. We've shot sort of between us in the sense that we've had sort of 2 or 3 people constantly shooting together over the years. But we just last year, I thought it was really great that we actually got the sort of core shooting lot together on one day, and then so that was last year, and then we got this year as well. But so it's good. It's really good, and. It's the only day that you can be completely misbehave because everybody remembered you as when you were sort of 19 or 20 years old and constantly misbehaved.
I was going to say, hopefully you can't do anything more embarrassing than what you did when you were 19.
Absolutely, no chance at all. So that's it. And there are no holds barred, and everybody is incredibly rude, and particularly sort of about me because I miss spectacularly and very, very regularly. And people just say, sorry, I thought you were a professional shot. You used to have a shooting ground. You make guns. I mean, surely you're a better shot than I've just seen. So I get the short end of the stick.
That's so cool. And that will be a lovely change to, work-related days. It couldn't be further from it in a way.
Absolutely. No. One of my friends is there who will not be shooting with it now, who blames me still for. He's not a particularly tall chap, and many years ago I sold him an AYA 25-inch, and he absolutely convinced himself that the only reason he was such a bad shot is because he had short barrels, and he never stops, even sort of 30 years later, commenting on the fact that actually he would have been a hell of a shot if actually he'd had a proper length of gun.
I would have thought with the salesman in you would have sold him another one in that period of time, but obviously got a bit work to do.
Sadly, he bought the next one from someone else. He became far too smart.
Goodness, first round on him. Well, have a lovely time. So maybe we should do What's That You're Drinking and What's That You're Drinking later.
Yes, good idea.
Right. What I'm drinking now is coffee in preparation because I have no doubt that it's going to be a fairly liquid evening. What I'll be drinking later is I really like drinking wine. Cirencester was a big shock to me because my kids can't believe it. When I went to Cirencester, I had never drunk a pint of beer in my life. I drunk 2 halves, but never drunk a pint.
Wow.
And then got to play rugby, and then I had to learn how to drink a pint down in one. But if you've only ever drunk 2 halves of beer by the time you were, I think, 20, and then you were standing in a line of people doing boat races with pints of beer, that was a complete shock to the system.
Learn fast.
Yeah.
Goodness, yeah. So, a pub in the Cotswolds on a sort of, it's got colder, the fire's going to be lit, all your mates there from uni. That is just the perfect sort of session type, get out the local ale at the bar. I'm so jealous.
Yeah, that's good. Will be a really, really nice night.
And the decent wine, obviously. Very good.
Lovely. What have you got, Chris?
So as you could tell, it's just after lunch. And I also have something to do this afternoon, not quite as fun as that, but I've got a meeting. And there's a reason to this one. I have a alcohol-free Guinness. Alcohol-free beers for many years have had a bad rep because basically they tasted awful. And it was fully justified in my opinion. Recently, as is pretty hard to avoid, the marketing's gone through the roof. They've all been up in their game. This one, if you haven't had it, is a real winner. The alcohol-free Guinness, in my experience, is probably the best of the ones I've tried. And often, and as happened on Saturday as well, you get to the end of the day, everyone's sort of chatting after the day. They need to have these more on shoots because at the end of the day, I'm about to get in the car for 3 hours. That's exactly what I wanted to go with the scenario. Obviously, a cup of tea is nice, but a few others were staying over and it just didn't really fit the vibe. And so this is a big endorsement for the alcohol-free Guinness. If you haven't tried it, go and grab one. So I've got one for the pod for today.
So that in a can?
Yeah, it's got the old little widget inside.
I was going to say, the most important question is, has it got a widget?
Yeah, it does, yeah. I always, when you're at uni and school, they always talked about widgets in business studies. I always thought that was exactly what they were, but widget was a generic term. That and the Boddington's widget, they had one as well, didn't they?
They did, yes. Very good adverts.
Yeah. So, how about you, George?
Well, I'm very impressed by how abstemious you both are. And I thought one of us had probably better keep the show on the road. So although it is early in the day, I have got an alcoholic drink. And this weekend we were shooting at home, as I've already said, and I was joined by two of my colleagues, Frank and Digby. And as we've talked about on this podcast before, Digby likes to brew his own, well, he calls it brandy. I think we should probably call it moonshine. And he very kindly brought me a bottle of his aged brandy. But he also brought a bottle of something that I've never had before, which was his own homemade damson brandy, which I have to say is a revelation. It is absolutely fantastic. It's got no sugar in it at all. It's basically damson juice and brandy. But my God, it's beautifully dry and not got that sort of slightly cloying thing that you can sometimes get with slow gins and such like. And as a shoot day tipple, it's absolutely brilliant. So delicious. So I've got a very small amount of that.
Do you realise how big his head's going to be after he hears this and we turn up for a team meeting?
Well, between you and me, I reckon it was probably Mrs. Digby who made it.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it is seriously good.
Just to give him any more credit, was this his idea or had he stolen this from someone else?
I haven't found out.
Okay.
Let's assume it wasn't.
Is that the safer option?
Yeah. So I'm having a very, very little snifter of that just to stir the creative juices for when I've got an article to write this afternoon.
Fair enough. Damson brandy, has this come across your radar before, Mark?
No, never. Yeah, it sounds interesting.
Yeah, so it's made from, the brandy is made from the cider that Digby makes, and he's got a little still. So if you hear of an explosion in Cornwall at some point in the next few years, there's a reasonable chance that it's Digby's house going up.
He could make Calvados then.
Well, that's the thing. So sometimes he calls his cider Calvados if it's gone wrong.
Right.
But yes, he has had a go at Calvados, hasn't he?
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I think we'll move on. So the next segment, Mark, is a segment that we call Whose Bird Is It Anyway? And it's where we ask our listeners to write in with their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas, and we do our level best to help them. We keep our correspondents anonymous to protect the guilty. And in this case, I have decided to name our correspondent Lawrence, who has written, "Dear George and Chris, I have an urgent shooting query. I'm a big game shooting and conservation advocate, but sadly I'm going to have to give this up for the next few years as I've just accepted a job in Saudi Arabia. Sadly, Saudi isn't exactly hot on shooting, with shotguns being banned for the purposes of hunting as far as I can tell. Accepting a job in the Middle East wasn't really on my or my partner's 5-year plan, but here we are and our move is fast approaching. I'd like to get a few different days in before I go, which should be quite easy with all that's on offer on Guns on Pegs. However, here's the rub. We've had to move our wedding up by a year and have miraculously managed to organise a wedding and farewell party within 2 months. This means I'm basically broke, as weddings seem to cause money to flow out of your bank account faster than Niagara Falls. So what would you suggest I do on a shoestring budget as my last shooting expedition before marriage and my shooting hiatus? For reference, I live in the Peak District and will be moving in the new year.
This sounds like, can you read out my beg for someone to invite me to a shoot day just before my wedding and before I go to Saudi Arabia? Mark, do you want to have a go first at answering this quite tricky quandary?
Very tricky. Yeah, I mean, the timescale is not going to help either, is it?
No.
So he's got very short notice and he hasn't got much money, which is not two good combinations. I suppose what he really wants to find is some good rough shooting where you can get you get far more bangs for your bucks in every respect. So what would I do? I think I would concentrate on that. Where can I go to which gives me good value for money with rough shooting? The problem tends to be with those is that because you haven't got big teams of guns, finding vacancies, single gun opportunities is really, really hard, isn't it?
On that sort of stuff, it's so hard because it's in such demand, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, the easy one is whatever his budget is just to, take a gun on a day, a driven day, probably a relatively modest, if not very modest, driven day, but he's only going to get probably a day's worth of sport. Whereas if he goes to something significantly cheaper, he could get several days for the same amount of money, but finding it, not going to be easy at all. Maybe a bit of woodcock shooting, possibly down in Wales or something. There's some quite good opportunities for rough shooting up in the Scottish borders.
Yeah.
That's another possibility. Challenging, I think.
I like the wood where you were going with the woodcock. There's also, you probably need to find a few mates for those, but there's also like a few sort of, especially on the edges of Scotland all around it, like the snipe type setups, a bit of wildfowling chucked in.
Yeah, I'd get on the wildfowling, I think. But also I think that we can come at this from another angle, which is the budget issue.
As in, just sort it out.
Try to cut down the wedding.
Yeah,
well, try to make it a very small wedding, and then he can have a much bigger budget.
So, there is that, but also, they're moving to Saudi, so presumably they're not asking for lots of furniture and kitchen appliances on their wedding list. No. I would just say, we'll have the
fish where you're coming from.
We'll have the fish slice, but forget about the toaster and put that money towards my shooting budget, please.
Yes. Do you see his wife being similarly enamoured by the concept of the shared wedding present? And she's at home and he's off. She doesn't get the toaster, but instead he has some money for shooting.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, good. I like your idea, George. I mean, it's kind of one of those you don't ask, you don't get, isn't it? But exactly. I have a feeling he won't get. The only other thing is he could sort of borrow from, I'm going to guess that you don't take a job in Saudi Arabia, just like all footballers think, unless the pay is a little bit better than over here.
That's probably tax-free, isn't it?
So I'd sort of borrow forward slightly on this one and go out with a bang, because he's not going to get... I'd shoot all of next season's shooting and the year after before he goes, and just use money that he probably has in savings, and don't worry about that. It's tricky, isn't it?
And then, of course, if he is going to be flush with cash with his new highly paid job in Saudi, there must be some opportunities in that part of the world. We know there are in North Africa. There's Morocco, for example. So what could he be doing in Saudi or nearby?
So I didn't know Saudis are not... They ban shotguns for the purposes of hunting. Is this... Anyone got any knowledge on this?
No, I haven't. Keen on their hawking and their falconry. Not at all knowledgeable about what happens with shotguns or rifles.
Well, I think it's definitely worth exploring what the options might be in that neck of the woods.
Most of the falconry that happens out there has got some sort of English link. I've seen whenever I've seen these Middle Eastern sort of hawking teams or falconry teams, there's always some sort of English trainer knocking along alongside them. So there's probably some ins he's got there to try and get out there when he does that. Yeah, tricky. He's got a serious amount of negotiation to do, not only on the shooting front for the price, but with his future wife. And then, yeah, good luck. Not sure. He's left us with a tough one there. Of course, I mean, if you are near the Peak District and you just feel sorry for Lawrence here, just send a message, pod@gunsonpegs.com. We'll forward it on. Or George will take it and then just tell them that Lawrence, to turn up saying his name's Lawrence.
Also, if anybody happens to know any good places to stay in the Peak District, do let me know.
Oh, yeah? Where are you going?
I don't know yet.
Are you going shooting with Lawrence as well?
Well, maybe. But yeah, I think wildfowling's got to be the thing, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I don't know how oversubscribed wildfowling clubs are, but if you can get in there, you can get out on the foreshore every so often. I mean, he's in the Peak District. He couldn't be much further from the coast.
Yeah, the closest would be sort of Kings Lynn, the Fens, Holbeach, that sort of area. Many years ago, I was a member of a wildfowling club there, and for my sins, because it was before I drove, and just showing how long ago it was, I used to take my gun on the train and my dad's dog, and then catch the train to Kings Lynn from Sheffield.
Goodness.
And then be picked up and go wildfowling.
A bit more accepted then than it is now. You can't even take your guns on the... Haven't most train companies banned them now?
Yes, I don't imagine. I mean, mine was literally in a gunsling, so it looked like a gun.
Yeah.
You can't imagine wandering around on Sheffield Station catching the train to go to Kings Lynn and doing that.
So the place I'm going to on Monday, the last...
Come on, tell everyone where.
It's a hell of an opportunity. I've got a very generous friend. I won't name the name of the moor because you probably know him well, Mark. But he's invited me for a mixed species walked up day, which I've done once before, and it's one of these mixed species day which smashes most other mixed species days into a cocked hat with a bit of absolutely everything on a lovely, lovely moor and a lodge. He's just completely gutted and redone. Which narrows it down for a few. You can see your cogs whirring, trying to work out where this is. Anyway, it's just one of those days, but it's in Durham. And I got the train back with my gun over my shoulder in the slip and a bin bag of grouse once back to London because I wanted to take them back. I literally couldn't do it any other way. And I put them in the little locker area. And obviously they got a little bit warm by the time they got back. So I got back, I saved them. They were okay. Well, they were fine. I quickly got back with the breasts out of all of them as quickly as I possibly could to get them in the fridge and saved it. So that was the last time. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, so rather different. I remember many, many years ago when I left Cirencester, I then went travelling in South America after I qualified and sort of was obviously had fairly sheltered upbringing. I decided to see sort of in Bolivia, 3 women come into the carriage with a crate, put their hand in the crate, take out the chicken, wring the chicken's neck, pluck the chicken, and then another one had a sort of little 3-legged stool, and then they got a fire going in the carriage, and they cooked sort of coq au vin, but obviously Bolivian version of coq au vin in front of me, and actually then, and they were peeling sort of carrots or vegetables, and then actually offered me lunch.
Amazing.
It was a wonderful experience.
Goodness, I should have gone further.
So, yeah, I don't know if we've got any brilliant solutions, but I think that your wildfowling is where I'd begin and the wedding list. So I hope that helps, Lawrence.
Oh, I've got one other.
Oh, go on.
You know, some people really frown upon this, but there's a few pigeon operators who have access to huge amounts of land, carefully manage it, like monitor where the numbers are and where they need culling and whatnot. And they offer fixed price, guaranteed number of shots days. There's a couple on Guns on Pegs. They are seriously pricey when it comes to what people expect to pay for pigeon shooting, but you get a serious amount with it. You're on for a proper cull day. That's something that he could extend to if he's looking for bangs for bucks, as it were.
Very good idea. Good. Normally we do an unpopular opinion now, but in the last couple of episodes or so, we've had quite a lot of controversial conversations, and I thought that I might just try and lighten the mood a bit in this episode. So instead of an unpopular opinion, we are returning to a favourite of mine, which is the Forgotten Drives segment.
This one comes from an American couple who George has called Franklin and Barbara. Is that actually their names?
No, and I'm hoping you're going to do this in an American accent.
George, don't even go there.
Go on.
Dearie me. No, I can't even try. It'll be so bad. I don't even know where to start. It's going to come out Welsh or Indian, but anyway. So I won't. Dear Chris and George, first, I have to say I thoroughly enjoy the podcast. Always informative and entertaining. Thank you very much. I thought I'd share 2 forgotten drives. My wife and I organise driven shooting parties, mainly for Americans, in Wales, England, Scotland, Spain and Morocco. The first is the Longwood Drive at the Hay Shoot in Newnham-on-Severn. The setting is spectacular, with broad views across the Severn Estuary. There is a spot there that is one of my favourite places on the planet, really. The Longwood Drive was always the last of the day at the Hay, and the Hay was usually the last estate we visited after a week of shooting at different estates, so a bittersweet spot, but an amazing drive. The guns were strung in a descending line down a steep gully that parallels a ridgeline of mature trees. Birds were driven from game crops at the top of the ridge and over the trees. Brilliant birds they were. One of my favourite memories is looking down the line and seeing my son Graham, then aged 11, taking down a seriously respectable hen pheasant with enviable style. It must have looked like a sparrow to him. He was so excited that he went over the hill after the drive and picked the bird himself and insisted that we get it stuffed. The hen now lives on his bookshelf in his room. Sadly, the Hay Shoot is closed for now. It had just come under new management the season before the pandemic, but didn't survive. Hopefully someone revives the programme because it was a really nice shoot filled with fond memories. The second is the Cliff Drive at the Riverside Shoot in Sedbury Park near Chepstow, also overlooking the Severn. The Cliff Drive was similarly reserved for the end of the day if the conditions were right. Guns lined along the foreshore along the river, and birds were driven over tall trees at the top of a cliff face. The pheasant and partridge would crest the treetops and immediately peel left or right when they saw the river. So it was an entire drive filled mainly with high-crossing birds. Extremely challenging and wonderful fun. Sadly, Riverside also did not come out of the pandemic intact, which is a real shame. Extremely well run by a team that have become good friends with since. Luckily, we've stayed in touch and get to catch up from time to time, but I do miss that shoot. It's also the place where I discovered that I had put petrol in my diesel engine rental truck, but that's a different story. And an expensive one, I expect.
Yes, it's two very nicely written descriptions there, I think.
Lovely. I didn't know the Hay had closed. It's sad, isn't it? You forget quite a few shoots didn't make it through the pandemic.
Yes. Well, let's focus on the positives. There's very happy memories associated with these 2 drives, and I like hearing about them.
Lovely. And the fact that I think for the first one at the Hay, kind of his son shooting that bird on that drive, that's clearly his memory. And I think we can all relate to that in one way or another. Are either of these shoots familiar with you, Mark?
I know of the Hay, but I don't know the other one at all, no.
So Lawrence and Franklin and Barbara, and now you, Mark, are all the newest members of the Most Noble Order of the Garters and will very soon be in receipt of the much coveted, highly desirable Guns on Pegs podcast, Shooting Sock Garters. If you two have got a shooting confession, a quandary or a query, or if you've got an unpopular opinion, or you'd like to tell us about a forgotten drive, and you'd like a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com.
You got a pair of the new garters coming your way, Mark. The shooting sock company who produce our limited edition garters, which cannot be purchased elsewhere, have now got lavender instead of lilac or something in them. Ooh. So they've had a real big change.
Right, thank you. That's something to look forward to. I'm sorry that I missed the sort of controversy ones. I must sort of go back to actually hear that. So what was the best or the worst of the controversies that you had?
You would have loved it.
Sorry, are you suggesting that I'm at all controversial, Chris?
I know that you'd have an opinion on it. That's what I know. George?
Okay, quickly to rake over the old coals. We have had long conversations about best practice and self-regulation and all that sort of stuff. We've had slightly shorter but no less heated conversations about double gunning and stuffing, and touched on bag sizes. Whether shoots make money or not was another one. Well, I can't remember what else.
All the fun stuff.
Yeah,
all the fun stuff. God, yeah.
But they're fun episodes. So some of my favorite episodes. So definitely do go back and have a listen. Yeah, they're great.
The theme has been sustainability a little bit. The future that we often talk about, which I don't know. I go through. I'm sure, like you, Mark, go through sort of weeks of ups and downs. And some weeks I'm feeling immensely positive about all the opportunities, and then other weeks I'm like, oh my god, the burden of it all. This week is one of the positive weeks.
Yeah, I think you've got to stay positive. You know, one of the sort of disadvantages of being quite old. I remember my father. There was a sort of people came over for drinks one Sunday. And I would probably be about 12 or 13, and by then was mad on shooting. And my dad was talking to other people who shot, who were friends of his, and they're having drinks. And I remember them saying, so this would be, I was born in 53, so this would be in the 60s, mid-60s. And I remember my dad saying, well, I don't think we'll be shooting in 10 years' time, certainly not 20 years. And that is, we all think then it was absolutely fantastic. And they were thinking one of the main things then was Harold Wilson and Dennis Healy or whatever it was, and all of the cost and 98 pence in the pound income tax, and that shooting wouldn't survive those costs. And there we are, whatever it is, 50 years later, 60 years later, and we're still shooting. So I think positivity is really essential.
That's a really, really important point, that, because that's to survive all of those scenarios just shows how resilient the idea of getting out and enjoying yourself is, really.
And I can tell you, Mark, that you are on the same page as some of our listeners who actually gave us a bit of a ticking off for being too doom and gloom about things on occasions. Right. So people agree with you, and I am inclined to agree as well that I think the end of shooting is always 10 years off and will continue to be for a very long time, as long as we all keep doing the right things. As long as it's always 10 years in the future, I don't mind.
Yeah.
But Mark, I wanted to ask you, off the back of the Forgotten Drives, I mean, you've been all over the show. There must be some great drives that you've seen come and go over the years.
Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, the problem is trying to list the number of drives that I would love to revisit, or because they've gone or whatever it is. I go up frequently up by Stirling, and I never saw it in its before the dual carriageway was built, but there was a drive across what is now, I think, the A9, and on the Stirling estate, as in the SAS family's estate. And apparently when the dual carriageway was being cut through the cutting there, and you'll see there's a church up on the right-hand side, they still lined the guns out whilst the earth movers were working. And that was apparently, and the Stirling family said, well, we've seen much worse than that in our experiences, therefore we're going to carry on and make the most of it. And I drive up that road and I look at it and think it must have been an absolutely fantastic drive. So that must have been very sad to have lost.
They had 1 year where major construction came in and made their drive even better than it was before.
Yes, even better. If you put up with the yellow diggers and things, it would be absolutely fine.
It reminds me of something you've definitely thought about because you drive along it all the time. The old cut-off on the M40, or is it the A40?
Stokenchurch.
Yes, exactly. Where everyone just goes, the day that they shut the M40, we're going to line the guns out on here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's obviously because of the West Wickham and Churchill connection. I use that forever. But that was also I worked for quite a long time in mid Wales, and in those days there were no red kites anywhere other than in the Elan Valley, and there were about eight either 6 or 8 red kites still in the Lowland Valley. So I saw red kites then. And then one day I was going to Heathrow, drove through, just got to the Stokenchurch cutting, and it was very early in the morning in the summer, looked out the window, and there was a red kite above the M40 at that cutting. And I looked up and I thought, no, that can't be a red kite. The nearest red kites are sort of miles away in mid-Wales. And that was when one of the Gettys had that estate just by the Stokenchurch, and that was the first release site for red kites in the south of England.
I wondered which estate it was.
Yeah,
because I call Stokenchurch, Red Kite Central.
Absolutely.
Play the game of pigeons versus red kite, counting in my head as I'm driving along, and I'll often get to 50 red kites and like 40 pigeons.
It's amazing
on that sort of 15-minute stretch.
Yeah,
it's just out of control, though, isn't it?
That's extraordinary.
But I suppose, Mark, one of the other things that must make up part of your working life is actually the planning out of drives, because of the work you do on grouse moors, bringing grouse moors back. Does it take a special eye to look at a landscape and think that's the way to do that bit?
Yeah, I mean, both ways. I mean, we do a lot of low ground shoot work as well. I mean, grouse are, in some ways, they're fascinating because in the main they stick to patterns. So grouse, you can push grouse uphill. Grouse, pushing them along the side of hill is very easy. That's where they're really comfortable at going. They really like to see heather where they are to where they're going to go to. If you try to take them off heather, they really don't like that for quite good reasons. So if you try to drive grouse off a moor onto, and you have the sort of butts or the stands right on the edge of moorland, they don't want to go there because it's not moorland behind. So they drive along left or right sides of a hill. They'll push up a hill, but they're very, very hard to ever take down a hill. They just don't like going from high to low. There's the odd place where it works, but in the main it doesn't. So they're quite sort of probably, you quite often get it wrong to start with, but very quickly gets a pattern as to where the grouse will go there. And that's much the same in the main with low ground. Sometimes you think, a drive should work. You should be able to take partridges. I remember we got involved in a shoot right up on the North Yorkshire coast, and they'd had a keeper there before who'd come from the West Country where the valleys were quite narrow, and they just couldn't get the partridges to cross these valleys because up in Yorkshire they were much, much wider, had terrible east winds coming off the coast. And we then brought a local keeper who also, he'd been a keeper very nearby, again with wide valleys, and he transformed the shoot, whereas everybody had said, no, you can't take partridges that far across a valley. And he looked at it, he said, no, that's bloody rubbish, lad. Of course you can, I'll show you. And he did, absolutely transformed it. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see what works and what doesn't work. And quite often you are surprised, either the ones that do work that you don't think will work very well, or those that you're absolutely certain are going to work and are going to be stunning, and then they're not. And, but that's trial and error.
You must have a shoot in mind that you think back as being like one of the best success stories of your involvement. Is there one that springs to mind that you can share and you think, God, I'm so pleased with sort of where that's gone?
I think actually, it sounds trite, but lots of things that, lots of drives and lots of shoots that you've really enjoyed because they have either been transformed or they've just been a delight. And that probably the nicest thing has been who you work for. I mean, I think that's the great thing, and I still do it now, sort of whatever it is, 50 years on, because I just really love the people that I work with, and that's either with the clients, the keepers, and the whole shoot day staff. And I think that's probably something that some people in shooting really have never got to grips with. The shooting has been about shooting, and that's really the interest. Whereas the great thing about shooting is that you've got this extraordinary place, often absolutely stunning, very beautiful. You've got some great sport. You've got lovely guns, you hope. But you've also got this tremendous collection of people who all contribute to the day. And I think that if you don't appreciate that, you miss so much about shooting. And I think, all the things that I look at now, that's what I sort of concentrate on. And I go back to places, and sometimes I go back to places that I first went to, 20 or 30 years ago or whatever it was. And then you see how it developed and how it's grown.
I imagine you've got involved with all sorts of estates with lots of different types of owners and for all sorts of different reasons and justification on their part for wanting to do it. Slightly leading question this, but something George and I find when we're talking to people on the pod is like the passion and the excitement that runs through first and foremost out of everything they do. I can imagine that there are people out there where you just know from the moment you're going to meet them that they're going to end up having a special shooting estate underneath them because of everything that they love about it, and that you're kind of working with that passion that then sort of shows itself in the end result.
Yeah, and there are probably, I'm not sure whether it's sad, but it's I think it's truism. There are a lot of people who enjoy shooting, and there are a lot of people who have shoots who enjoy having shoots, and there are a few who are absolutely just mad on it, and they're extraordinary. I mean, I've got a client with grouse shooting, and he is still the guy that if he lived in Truro would drive to Inverness for a day's grouse shooting and back again, and go up there. He's still like that, and shoots a lot, and shoots grouse a lot, but he's still aged sort of 50 or must be 50 now. He's still as keen as I was when I was 13 or 14 and that sort of thing.
That's so
and
good
they're great
hear.
Because they're great motivators as well. But you also get it, you get it in keepers. I think if you want to do something well, whatever it is, you have to be really passionate about it. I just think that that must be the same if you're a great chef. If you do not have the passion, I don't see how you could be a fantastic chef. And if you go and look at keepers who are just passionate about the job, they always operate at a level that's different to just the ones who are, he's pretty good.
And excitement's infectious as well, isn't it? If the person running the shoot or who owns it is excited, then that rubs off on their team, and that rubs off on the people who are fortunate enough to be shooting on their place as well. So that is such a key thing that everybody probably, certainly in my experience, people take their lead from the big boss.
Yeah.
So in that vein then, and you definitely won't want to go near names here, but you must have had some places that have gone wrong essentially for that reason. Just, they've got all the best intentions to you on paper, but doesn't carry through probably because they're just not up for it enough.
I think that's, I think unfortunately we live in a society where often people think they should be doing things and it becomes a norm to do. And whilst that's, if they're clients and they pay you, that's obviously what we need to continue. But it is not, you don't have the same motivation as you do when you've got someone who's absolutely passionate about it. And sometimes those people, it goes in phases. They take up shooting, and then they enjoy that, then they get a shoot, and then after a time they sort of either lose interest, don't want the shoot, or give up shooting, and then they move to something else. And quite often that happens, and then you still see the same person. So you still see someone who at 80 is still as passionate about shooting or fishing as they are. I mean, I think that must be, I'm not 80 yet, but I'm still I've been doing it. I first went shooting with my dad when I was 8. So 62 years later, I'm still doing it, and I still love it.
The other thing about having somebody in charge who's super passionate and super excited is I guess they're more prepared to spend the money when it needs to be spent, or to take a chance on something exciting when the opportunity arises, given the choice between the safe bet that will be fine and the potentially risky one that could be amazing, they might be more inclined to go with the thing that makes it that bit more special because they have that inside them that makes them want to.
Yeah, and definitely. If you, if everything has to, if performance related is what you want, you certainly don't want to be involved in grass moors. You it may come very good, in which case that's a bonus, but it could be very bad, and it could be very good one year, and it could be very bad the next year. I mean, we would think now this year those moors, the high wetter moors that have had a lot of grouse in the North Pennines this year, the worm burden's high. In some places, it's higher than I've ever seen before. That doesn't look very good at all for next year. Now, if you're an owner who is used to that cycle, is used to the fact that it could be fantastic and it could be horrible, that's fine. If, however, you think that year after year I have a grouse moor and it should perform and I should have my, whatever it is, 6 or 8 or 10 guest days before I might let them, grouse shooting's not for, or running a grouse moor is not for you.
No, exactly. So I wanted to ask, actually, because I mentioned it at the start, your business has been credited with turning around some grouse moors and doing amazing things. Other than the passion and obviously the deep pockets, what are the things that really make a grouse moor just really get on its game and become sort of much talked about amongst the community, as it were?
It's really interesting. I sort of got involved with it without understanding it. When I started, and then gradually got involved and took my first lease on a moor, I think when I was 20. Well, when I left Cirencester, took on a very, very scruffy, almost white, had almost no heather on it at all, grouse moor in the Peak District, and then took on that, had that for 8 years, and then had another lease on another one for 30 odd years, and then another one. And over the time, you had to learn, even if you were not very bright, which I'm not, you had to learn quite a lot from those experiences, and particularly when you were playing with your own money. Well, and I think the thing, grouse is, you have to have a passion to make it worthwhile, because the economics are generally horrible. I mean, game shooting is expensive, and grouse shooting is incredibly expensive. So it's sort of, it is not for the faint-hearted. It also can't be measured, I think, in value for money. I just don't think you can say, when you hear people say, oh, it's not worth £200 a brace or whatever it may be, I think that if you correlate it with a cost, then it's not for you.
You've gone wrong in the first place, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just not for you. I mean, it's probably like me with a very, very good bottle of wine. A mega expensive bottle of wine is completely wasted on me because I couldn't tell unless someone told me that it was worth that money. Therefore, there's no point me drinking that expensive wine. And I think if grouse shooting, if you correlate it to value for money, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yes.
Interesting, yeah.
What's made it, I think, worthwhile has been if you have a grouse moor, and I learned this by myself, but by virtue of my employing my own keepers, was that your keepers are your managing directors, and sometimes when you meet a sort of hill keeper, you might not automatically correlate that with him or her with a managing director, but in reality, that is what your keeper is. They're the managing director of that enterprise, and in all businesses, the person running them is actually, and in grouse moors, the owner thinks that he or she runs them, or the agent thinks he or she runs them, but actually, in reality, it's the keeper that runs them. We can delude ourselves, but that's the reality. The key is that person, and it is in business. It's how good is that person? How committed? How passionate? How hardworking are they? And to get the most out of a moor in terms of enjoyment, you will need a really awesome keeper. And if you have a really awesome keeper, the moor will run, you'll still have the highs and lows, you'll still have the good grouse years and the bad grouse years, but overall, the grouse it will perform pretty well, and you will enjoy it much better as a result, just as you would with in any other format.
It's all about the people.
As ever. Yeah. I mean, it get opportunity to now to call out some keepers that you think deserve some praise, because the grouse keepers get a lot of chat, don't they? More so than low ground keepers. It must be that I'm going down the wrong route, suggesting it could be a harder job, but there's certainly amongst my friends of mine, grouse keepers get a lot of airtime for some of the work they do.
Yeah, I think being you should never, and that again probably took me a bit of time. I originally thought groundskeepers worked incredibly hard, and actually low groundkeepers had it easy. And I don't have that view at all now. That's complete rubbish. The advantage of grouse is that they're completely wild, and therefore you don't need to feed and water them and look after them in that way. That is not the case with pheasants and partridges. If you do not feed and water them and look after them, they don't survive, or they wander off, or whatever it is. So you've got a massive commitment in both ways, but they're just different commitments. Many good grouse keepers that I've come across started off as pheasant and partridge keepers, and one of the great advantages that they had when they were young, they had to get used to routine, to rigorous self-discipline, which is a fantastic thing to start. If you've got to look after, you've got to feed your partridges, you've got to look after whether it's on the rearing field or in the release pen or in the incubator before that. You have this discipline, this self-discipline. That sets you up. If you learn that sets you up hellish well, whatever you do. And it really sets you up if you're then a grouse keeper. You go on to a grouse moor and you have that self-discipline, that self-motivation. Quite often, if you start as a grouse keeper without, and perhaps if you start in the wrong place, the wrong moor, under the wrong head keeper, you don't learn that. And that, I don't think it's something you can learn retrospectively. I think you really need that at the outset, that self-discipline.
That's the grounding, Yeah.
And I've sort of met and worked with and employed some awesome groundskeepers. I mean, Andrew Chadwick, who worked for me for 30 as my own head keeper for I think about 37, 38 years or something. He said the reason he managed to work and last as long with me is that he's deaf. And I said I did it because no one else would employ him for that length of time, and therefore it was an act of charity. So anyway, between us, we obviously got on. Jeremy Wearmouth, now head keeper at Gunnerside, and has been for a long time. He was my head keeper at Narsdale, and I learned a phenomenal amount from him in a very, very quiet, very wry approach. Jeremy, awesome groundskeeper, and lots of others, young and older. Phenomenal. And I've been very privileged.
And it's just occurred to me that we've spoken about this a bit on the podcast before. But obviously, when it comes to grouse moors, there's a lot of controversy, which we won't go into, but there's an incredible amount of very important work that grouse keepers do from a conservation perspective. And we've touched on it on the podcast before that the conservation angle maybe doesn't get quite the same airtime as it does on lowland shoots. And we've talked about the hard work of people trying to run wild grey partridge shoots, and that seems to be a bit of a movement that's slowly gathering pace. Can you see that becoming something that mere mortals will be able to access as a shooting experience, or do you think it'll remain the world for private individuals and private shoots?
I would love it to. I think is the statistic from the old Ely Game Advisory that we shot more partridges the last year than with pheasants in England in 1962. So it's not as long ago. I mean, I was actually around in 1962. You can't imagine that was the case. And bear in mind that there was almost no partridge releasing in the 60s.
That's mad, isn't it? The significant change that's caused that level of decline.
Well, my father was in was a sort of businessman who shot. He was in a syndicate, two syndicates in North Nottinghamshire, sort of South Yorkshire area, and in sort of what they call the Dukeries, works up that sort of area. And we would regularly, when I first went with him, we would shoot sort of 40 to 60 brace of wild partridges, wild greys in those days, and the low ground keeper, keep it in many ways like a grouse moor with fen traps. That was pre-Larson's to start with, but killing crows and magpies was, that was a real important part because of the wild greys. I can't remember how old I was, but I think it was be 13 or 14, and the keeper on both, they had two keepers on these two shoots. One keeper on each of the two shoots, and I remember the first year they reared and released 1,000 pheasants. Until then, the dominant sport was wild grey partridges, and that was on perfectly normal farmland, of which much of the country had greys. I mean, in '76. When I was my last year at Cirencester, if you drove the Fossway over the top of the Cotswolds, I remember seeing straw bales out there in some of those valleys and Doversford and that sort of area, and that was shooting wild greys in 75 and 76.
And with your land agent hat on, briefly, do you see that changes in agricultural subsidies and that sort of thing might present more of an opportunity for people who are interested in trying to do that sort of thing? Do you think you'll see more people doing that, or do you think it's not quite the right sort of subsidy to make it possible?
I think some of them are. In fact, yes, that change is definitely helping. The big problem is that predator control is absolutely essential. If you want to have a shootable surplus, you have got to have predator control. And until nationally we understand it and accept that, we will never have a shootable surplus, and will continue to have biodiversity loss. And we can, having good quantities of a wide range of birds is essential, and predator control is absolutely essential.
It made me laugh on Monday. I read an article Francis Fulford wrote on Scribehound, and he called the RSPB they should be called the RSPP, the Royal Society for the Protection of Predators, because that's how wrong they've gone.
And I'd like to plug another article on Scribehound on exactly this topic, which suggests that there should be government subsidies for predator control.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the opportunities for people shooting, the problem is to have good predator control on reasonable acreages on the low ground, you've got to employ keepers, and a keeper is an expensive entity. So you're automatically, you're not going to get the return that you're going to get from a rearing program of pheasants or partridges. So you've got to be passionate. And if you look at all the people who actually have sort of really focused on wild partridges, one, they've had to have the money, and two, they've got to be absolutely focused and passionate about having a wild partridge shoot. And what better than actually having a wild partridge? I mean, to be, in the lowlands of England or Scotland, and actually having sort of coveys of wild greys burst over the top of a hedge. I mean, I think that would be unbelievable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I got so excited when we had George Ponsonby on. We had Tarquin followed by George Ponsonby, and we were talking about various different things. And after it, I was like looking at my 1 acre field, just working out how we could just make this just amazing for conservation. And anyway, just one point on that. So, because predator control is kind of at a national level so out of control, do you think the days of the sort of bag sizes, not just, I mean, grey's slightly different because of the reasons we just mentioned, but certainly on grouse, do you think those days are sort of 10 years ago, and the climate differences that we're now experiencing, which are causing such peaks and troughs on years, do you think the sort of consistency that we used to have is gone? Do you think when it's probably not going to be quite the same again? Do you think I mean, we're battling with a lot of different stuff now, aren't we?
Yeah, I do. I think that I think we've had a very good time with grouse, which has been aided by some modern techniques, some very good motivated owners who put a lot of money into their estates, their moorland estates, some very, very good keepers and high quality keepering. Do I think that's going to continue? I think we'll still have, good quantities of grouse, but I suspect that probably some of the peaks have exactly that, and we won't replicate them again. It's definitely getting harder by virtue of the fact. I mean, one of the biggest ones we've got is the restriction of, or the prevention of burning on deep peat. Most of the very good grouse moors are on deep peat. Not all of them, but deep peat it has a fantastic ability to grow some very, very good heather with a high feed content. It also produces very good insect haxes, which are essential for the first week of young grouse life. The banning of burning on deep peat has created all sorts of problems. I mean, it was understandable. I mean, lots of people get very excited about it. It was understandable how it gained momentum very quickly. So we were participants in schemes where we were paid, ESA schemes, by the government to burn 10% of your heather a year. And within 10 years, we were then banned from burning heather on deep peat. So quite interesting to see. Actually, probably it was 14 years, I think, probably different. But so you had these ESA schemes where you were paid and you had to. And at the end of the year, we were monitored by the government's department as to whether we'd actually burnt our 10%. And then 14 years later, you'd have been in court if you actually burnt heather on deep peat.
That's absolutely mental. Presumably, the real place we should be is in the middle of that somewhere. I mean, the idea that government's helping to pay. I mean, I can see sort of why they started to do that. I definitely can't see why they banned it. Should the middle ground have been where we ended up?
Yeah, the problem is we are a very developed nation. We have fantastic communications. We see wildfires throughout the world. And we, at Natural England in England, much more so than what was Nature Scot or in Scotland, are convinced that burning is not essential for biomass control. All the practitioners, there's no one who's involved in habitat management and particularly heather management on moorland who does not think that controlling the amount of burnable, combustible biomass is essential. And it is absolutely essential. Now, we've done it for 150 years by burning, organised burning, and before that by just sporadic burning. Now, it doesn't really matter. If there was another better way of doing it, that would be one thing. But the idea that we are now not burning and not controlling what is there, and once it catches fire in a wildfire, stopping these wildfires is absolutely impossible. I mean, the heat at the face of a wildfire is extraordinary. And you're doing it in areas where you're bloody hard to get machinery there. It's not terribly important for the fire brigade because mostly there's not going to be a loss of life. But our problem is that if we do not, we watch television, we see the fires in California, in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in everywhere, and yet we don't, for some reason, think that we can have wildfires, or we didn't think we could have wildfires in England. Then, of course, we had the 2022 wildfires, and that, but those were only following what we've had before. But for some reason, government and Natural England didn't think that that was going to happen in our climate. But as we get these longer drier summers, that's going to become an increasing problem, and wildfires on moorland and elsewhere are going to be a major, major issue. And if we're not careful, will lead to loss of life in England.
So infuriating. So Ian Coghill and Owen Williams have written some brilliant stuff on this on Scribehound. Ian's certainly got it down to a T. I mean, I just can't understand how it's even a debate. It's not science anymore, is it? It's something else. No. And very odd.
No, I think the problem is that burning on heather moorland is a direct connection with grouse shooting. And the problem is if it wasn't, I think we'd still be burning on deep peat.
Yeah, agree.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, sad. Right.
Well, I was going to say, so speaking of natural disasters, Mark, let's look into the future and imagine that the extinction level event asteroid is striking the Earth in a few days' time. Your affairs are in order. Your loved ones and your enemies have been reconciled. Your dogs have been fed and the tomatoes have been watered. How does your last day shooting begin?
My last day's shooting would be, perhaps not surprisingly, it would be grouse shooting. It would be with old friends, definitely. It would be possibly in the Peak District where I was born and brought up and shot my first grouse and shot reasonable. Well, other people shot lots of grouse, but I watched them shoot them. And it would probably be it would be a downwind day. It would be October, early October. So late September, early October. As I've got older, I've noticed the cold. So sort of late October, November days, standing in a moor with a sort of really horrible east wind, probably not quite as attractive.
But this is desert island shooting, so we can have a late October day and make it slightly warmer for you.
In which case, I don't mind how late it is. That would be absolutely awesome. And sort of 5 downwind drives. And for once, me shooting properly, the most really, many years ago, I was joint owner of the West Wickham, the Churchill shooting ground, and I also owned, very surprisingly, a health club, and my then partner said to me, he looked at me one day after we'd been shooting, he said, "Why is it, Mark, that you're the least fit person I know that owns a health club and the worst shot who owns a shooting ground?"
That's a gravestone.
I think that's
piece.
an accolade. Yeah, that's definitely a gravestone piece.
Yeah. So the problem is, it was very hurtful, but it was also very accurate. But what I'd like to do on this dream day, I want to be shooting like a god. I want two shots in front, 2 grouse, 2 shots behind, turning 2 grouse. Yeah. Absolutely.
Lovely.
So 100% strike rate on your perfect day.
Absolutely. Nothing less, please.
Why
nice.
not? Can you imagine? What would the conversation be like after amongst your mates if it happened?
I tell you what, the thing that not perhaps many people have seen is thinking about late grouse days. I remember we had an American friend over in early December in Northumberland, and he said, "Mark," he said, "do you ever shoot grouse this late?" And I said, "Well, yes, we quite often have a bit of mixed shooting. We might shoot a few grouse and then shoot pheasants and some woodcock and things there." And we then, for him, because he's never done it, we then did a small grouse drive, and we got up in the morning, and it had been snowing overnight, and it was still snowing. And so and I thought, he's come all the way and he wanted to see this. So we did this small grouse drive. Well, the problem was everything was white except for the people standing in the butts. So, so far as the grouse were concerned, and everybody was then in a green coat or a tweed coat, brown or green. As soon as they moved their arms, it was the only thing that wasn't white on the whole landscape. But what was extraordinary was when the snow, we then had a snowstorm came during the drive, and to see grouse get completely disorientated, and actually start to go up like ducks.
Oh my goodness!
Absolutely extraordinary. They completely got lost in the snow when they were flying through the snow, and then just sort of went up and up to try and presumably find where there wasn't snow. Anyway, it was a disaster. So my perfect late season grouse day would not be in a snowstorm, definitely.
Oh, very good.
And so then when the day's over, heading to the local pub, or how does it
you can pick a pub. It could be cool. We can transport a pub in Cornwall up to this grouse moor if you like. Is there a particular pub that you want to finish up at?
There've been so many good shooting pubs, but the problem is that after a time, they change owner, and then the shooting bit goes out, don't they? And so you sometimes go back many years later after one that you remember being fantastic, and actually you go there and you realise that it's not a good place now for shooting. But there were some lovely pubs in the North York's moors and places like that. And that would be a great way to finish the day. Log fire, lots to drink, not driving. And I think probably with shooting, my perfect day would not have me getting in the car going anywhere after the day. I think that probably spoils quite a lot of shoot days, doesn't it?
Yes. So you're a fan of the night before and the night after. Yeah. The back to back to back scenario we've been chatting through on this pod is the Saturday, Sunday break, Monday shoot day, being the ultimate, rather than sort of 2 days
back to work on Wednesday.
I agree. Kick feet up after the day. Reminisce on the fact that you didn't miss a single grouse all day on the perfect.
And so people would say, well, obviously you're such a great shot because you do own a shooting ground, so rather than you're such a terrible shot and you own a shooting ground.
Yeah, or that you'd become a great shot after you finished owning the shooting ground.
Yeah, probably. Yes.
Very good.
Lovely. Well, Mark, thank you ever so much for joining us. I know you've got to get away, so I think we'll wrap it up there.
Great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Bye.
As per usual, there is one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting stock garters by sending us your dilemmas for us to resolve, or by sending us your unpopular opinions or sharing your forgotten drives with us. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode, we will send you some garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time, but until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.